Hello, my name is Carl Brown. I'm one of the pastors at North Highlands Baptist Church, and I welcome you again to my backyard for another backyard Bible study this week as we're going through the book of Exodus. Let's get into the Word. Today we're going to be looking at Exodus 13 through 17. We're not going to be able to cover everything in chapters 13 through 17. There's just so much material here. But this is going to be one of the most exciting stories that we could have. And I know you're like, wow, how could it be more exciting than what we looked at last week when we looked at the 10 plagues? Now, it was a long study. The 10 plagues that happened to Egypt when God used Moses and Aaron as his mouthpiece, but also demonstrated his power and his authority and how he is the only one true God, and just humiliated Pharaoh and Egypt and their supposed gods, and with all his different plagues. And so it was an exciting study, but it ended with tragedy. It ended with the final plague being the plague of the firstborn, when all the firstborn children in the land of Egypt and all the firstborn animals died. And in that grief and in that moment, Pharaoh cast out, didn't just say, go with my blessing. He just said, get out of here, take your people and go. And the people of Israel left. But they didn't just leave. They actually were prepared to leave because God had told them to, and that's where we talked about the Passover and them preparing their house for the Passover. Part of the preparation for the Passover is that they were to be dressed, ready to travel. And so they were already ready to travel in the middle of the night when Pharaoh told them to leave and leave immediately. And everybody in Egypt was so grief-stricken and so beaten down by these plagues that God asked the children of Israel to ask them for things. And they gave them everything they had. They gave them all their riches. He gave them silver, gave them gold, gave them what they had left of wealth, and said, get out of here, go, and take it all. Just take what you want and go. And so they did. The Israelites plundered what was left of Egypt and hit the road. And so we're going to get to cover what happened after that today. The first thing I need to talk about is what happened in the very first part of the Passover and what happened for that. And preparation. In chapter 13, they talk a little bit about the preparation that they had to make for the Passover before the final plague. And in this preparation, God kind of establishes a covenant, one of many, but all part of one, I should say, covenant with the people of Israel to separate them and set them aside. He wants them to do three things. The first thing he wants them to do is he wants them to circumcise all the male children, all the males, period, all the males, old and young. And so they were all circumcised. Now, this goes back to Abraham. And when God said, you and your household and everyone who comes after you will be circumcised, set apart, something that is different between you and the rest of the world, saying that you're my chosen people. Well, somewhere along the line, they had stopped doing that and kind of forgotten their God in the time that they were in Egypt, and maybe even started following the other gods. So God said, no, that's still the rule. And so, as painful as it was, they had to be circumcised. And so they did that, and that was a physical way of separating them from anyone else and saying, this is my people. The next thing he had to do, he had them consecrate all their firstborn children as to the Lord. He had them separate all their firstborn and really kind of dedicate them to the Lord. And all the firstborn of the animals were given to the Lord. All the firstborn children were redeemed, so they gave something to redeem their children where they didn't have to give their children, and their children were consecrated or separated to serve the Lord. And so that was a way financially and spiritually for them to be separated and to consecrate them. So they were circumcised, they were consecrated, and the last thing was a symbolic thing. They were to commemorate this event. Every year they're going to have a festival now called Passover. They're going to commemorate what God has done, how God had saved them from Egypt, and they're going to remember how he did all these different plagues and how he rescued them from bondage. And so they're going to commemorate this event every single year with a festival. Again, separating them from other people. No other people had this festival. No other people had this holiday, but they would have it. And Jews still have it today. They still celebrate today, separating them from other people, saying, this is special. We are a special people for these three reasons. And all part of God's covenant with them, all part of God's commitment to them. This is their part. And so that all happens in chapter 13. And that's going to bring us now to the end of 13. And so now the Israelites are leaving. And Moses is leading them out, and they're leaving the land of Goshen and headed towards freedom, towards the promised land. I'm sure as the Israelites were walking out of Egypt, as they were walking out of the land of Goshen, with all their families, with all their animals, with all the wealth that they had just obtained, and with the Egyptians sent them out and Egypt decimated, that they felt victorious, that they felt amazing, that they thought that the conflict is finally over and that everything's going to be wonderful now, as we say, it'd be hunky-dory after that. Well, that's just not how it happened. Matter of fact, God wasn't even done with Egypt yet. Chapter 13, verse 18, we'll see that. It says, so God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. So they're ready to go. They're armed for battle, but God didn't lead them straight to the promised land, which was an interesting thing. And I know Moses knew this, and a lot of the others probably already knew this as well. There were three main roads that would take them up to what we call Israel today, but up to Canaan. They didn't take any of those roads. They avoided the lands that went straight to the Philistines. God took them down towards the desert, and so I'm sure they were wondering, what are we doing? Why are we going this way? But God led them, and so they had enough sense to follow God. Matter of fact, God led them with a pillar of fire and of a cloud. Let's look at that in verse 21. Chapter 13, verse 21 says, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel day and night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. So to give them very clear direction, there's this pillar, there's this column of cloud that is going before them, and they're following it. Moses is following it, the people are following him, and then at night it's a pillar of fire. Can't imagine how amazing that had to look, and how awesome and fearful you might be of a God who could do that. And they're following it. But notice the point that they're doing it day and night. They're not stopping. They are traveling day and night to get away, which they have a long way to go, especially where God's taking them. They probably had about 50 miles to go to get to where we're coming to, the Red Sea. Now they could have, in the same 50 miles, been halfway across and headed towards to the land of the Philistines, but they didn't go that direction. No, they went south, and they went day and night. So they were getting as far as they could. Now there were a lot of people. Bible says that in Numbers that there were 600,000 men who were battle ready. Now that's 600,000 men who are battle ready, and they usually were battle ready if they were between the ages of 20 and 50. And so, over the age of 50, there were a lot of people that age, and there were a lot of children, and then there's all the women besides. There may have been as many as 2 million, 2.5, 3 million people that were all going this in this caravan. And so they traveled as fast as they could, going day and night without stopping, doing the best they can, following this pillar of cloud. In chapter 14, I love what God did in verses 1 through 4. Now, we're pretty much going to read most of this chapter, so I hope you have your Bible out. And if you have pencil and paper, you want to write these things down, this is great. We'll spend most of our time in chapter 14 today. It says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hahiroth. 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 Pi Hahiroth. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Now, what God did here is just an amazing thing. It's like an amazing general tactician. He baited Pharaoh. He made the Israelites, instead of taking the easy roads, they went south. Well, that doesn't make sense. There's a desert over here, there's a desert over there, there's a sea over here, and there's these mountains, and it's desolate, and none of it's good for what they're trying to accomplish. And he said, move them around this way and that way. Well, this right here was making Pharaoh think that the Israelites were dumb, that they didn't know what they were doing, and they were confused. Now, let's talk about Pharaoh at this moment. It says that God was going to harden Pharaoh's heart again. Now, I don't think that was a very difficult task for God at this point. Remember, they are in great grief, and it's only been a day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is, since he's lost his son, and all the people of Egypt have lost someone in their family. Everybody's had death in their family. And now they're waking up from that grief, and they're seeing not only have they had a death in their family, they've lost their country. They've lost their economy. They've lost their structures. They've lost their workforce. Everything in Egypt is about to get very hard. They are really about to have to try to start over, and they're doing it without a workforce, and probably with a lot of them not even knowing how to do the work, because they haven't done it for 400 years. They've had these slaves. So that is enough to really anger them. And then when they see that 3 days later, when the Israelites should have already escaped, they should have already been, in the land of Canaan, where there are other armies and everything, and it wouldn't be wise for Pharaoh to go up there with his army. He sees that they're all just wandering around the desert, going back and forth. He's like, man, we are going to take them out. Either we're going to take them out or we're going to take them back. I don't know which one Pharaoh had in mind, but he is ready, and he is ready to get out there and attack the Israelites. And he was encouraged to do so by the trap that God set, knowing how Pharaoh would think. And he took his very powerful army. It says that he took his 600 chariots, his finest 600 chariots. Now that's a lot of chariots, period. But he took his finest 600 chariots. And then it says he took all the rest too. So he took his finest chariots and he took all the rest too. And he took his army and he went. Now, that's a formidable army in those days, to come out with all those chariots, and they can move very quickly. And of course the Israelites were moving very slow, but they had a good head start. But they were in the worst possible place. So here comes Pharaoh and his army. Not just his army, his mad army. Because this army is also angry at all the things that have happened to them and the loss of life that they've suffered. They are ready to wreak vengeance, or certainly put them back in chains. And so they all come out with great heat, just like the Lord wanted, just like he said he would do. He is not done judging Pharaoh and all of Egypt. So the Lord actually had the Israelites camp between the mountains and the sea. And so they were camped by the sea. He literally told Moses to camp them by the sea. So here you've got 2 million people on the beach and by the sea and all set up, and they have nowhere to go. And just when they have nowhere to go, here comes Pharaoh and his army. And look at verse 10. It says, as Pharaoh approached the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. Okay, that's not funny, but what's about to happen I think is funny. Because remember, Moses wrote this book. So he wrote this book, and he's the one that the children of Israel are complaining to. He's the leader. And I'm sure they said lots of things. They were terrified and they were crying out all these things. But this is the one that Moses remembered. And I love it just because it is dripping with sarcasm. And they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? That's rich. You can't say there's not humor in the Bible. Here they are in this deadly situation. They're like, what? Were there not enough graves in Egypt? You wanted us to come out here to die? Is this better? Is this part of your plan? I can see why that would be the one that Moses remembers and writes down, the one thing they said. Oh, that's rich. Oh, so that's really good. So here they are, and they've got Pharaoh's army on one side, they've got the sea on the other side, and they're all on the beach. And what is going to happen now? I love verses 13 and 14. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Wow. That's awesome. I mean, the Lord is going to fight for you. You only need to be still and let him do it. Stop your whining. Be still. Stand firm. Have faith. I love that. There's a new song that we're learning at church, and we're going to be introducing soon, but a lot of you already know it. It's by Elevation Music, and it says, I'm going to see a victory. I'm going to see a victory, for the battle belongs to the Lord. And another part of that song says that our God will always triumph. He doesn't know how to lose. He is God. He doesn't lose. He always wins. And since he's going to fight for me, I'm going to see a victory. Man, I tell you what, how awesome would it have been if they had just broke out into that song right after Moses said that, stand firm. I'm going to see a victory, for the battle belongs to the Lord. Now you'd think that they would have some faith after everything they had already seen and the way that they had judged. But you know what? I'm really not going to harp on them about this, because it would be scary when you have the sea behind you and you have the thunderous sound of hundreds of chariots coming towards you with people with fire in their eyes and their spears and swords, and they're ready to cause destruction and chaos. And you're there with your entire family, and you have never fought a battle in your life. I imagine they were so terrified. So the words of Moses, I'm sure, gave them some comfort, or gave them some strength. But I'm not going to get on to them for a little bit for their lack of faith, because that had to be a very scary situation, and we honestly don't know how we react unless we were there. Now, I know I'm laughing again because I know what's coming. I love how God responds to Moses, because Moses goes to the Lord. In verse 15, he says, then the Lord said to Moses, I'm sorry. So what did they say? They said, were there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out here to kill us and bury us? Is that the deal? And so God answers their sarcasm with what I find humor. I think it's great. And it says, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. I find that hilarious. He said, why are you crying out to me? Move on. Let's go. Get out of here. I gave you a staff. Let's go. They're like, let's go where? Oh, I just love it. So the Lord explains it, but I think that's hilarious. So forgive me for that if you find that irreverent. But he says, the graves, there weren't enough graves in Egypt. He goes, why are you crying to me? Go on, let's go. What are you standing around for? Get moving. And so then he tells Moses, which we know this great scripture. He tells him to stretch out his staff and his hand over the sea. He doesn't do this huge "you shall not pass" kind of thing where he sticks his staff in the water and it all just goes side to side. He just walks out into the sea with his staff and his hand raised up, and God brings this great wind that separates the water, and literally such a powerful wind that it makes it dry ground, and they're able to cross on dry ground. Now, I have read so many accounts of this where they've tried to explain this with science, and they've tried to explain it with different things that happen. They've had all these questions. Could the people of Israel stand that kind of wind? Would they be able to walk through when it's that windy? That could hold that back? It would have to be far more powerful than any tornado or hurricane. And they had all these different things. It says here that the children of Israel walked across on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. It is very specific. And when the Bible is very literal and specific, that's what it means. It's not trying to give you any kind of allegory. It's not being symbolic. It's being very specific. And it says it more than one time. They walked through on dry ground and there was a wall of water on the right and on the left. Listen, it's a miracle. Miracles are supernatural outside of natural events. It's extraordinary. It's not extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's beyond what's ordinary. And so you're not going to get a scientific explanation for this. God doesn't have to have one. He created all of that. He has all power. And here he split that sea. Might as well have taken his finger and just drawn a line across the water. It stayed up on left and right. He did it by his power. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't some great natural thing that happened at that moment. It was God's power, and it was done in such a way to display to all the Israelites and in a minute all the Egyptians that this is God's hand. He wants all credit for it. He just said through Moses that I'm going to fight for you. And so he's taking the credit for it. There's nothing else to explain it. It's a God thing. I love it. All right, so keep that in your mind. All right, so here's something that Hollywood always seems to get wrong in this, and something I want you to see. Verses 19 and 20. It says, "Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel." All right, before I read the next part of that verse, the angel and the cloud, two different things. So the angel went from the front of the army to the back, the army between Israelites and the Egyptians. Now, could he be seen? I don't know. But one angel against an army. God's team is the team to be on. I'm just saying. You want to be on God's team. They've got the players. And then the cloud, pillar of cloud, went from the front to the back as well. And so now it's between Pharaoh's army and the Egyptians. Now I want to read this next part, and this is something that a lot of people don't catch, and I just want you to see it. I'm still in the same verse 20. It says, "Throughout the night the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. But according to this verse, it's saying that the Pharaoh's army saw only the cloud and darkness. They didn't see anything. They literally could not see. They had darkness. But they weren't worried because they had the Israelites trapped. They couldn't go anywhere. They were against the sea. So they didn't have to worry about it. Here they are. They are encamped. They're right there behind this cloud, and they're going to get these Israelites when the morning comes. They're going to get them. On the back side of this curtain of cloud, the pillar is not cloud, it's fire, giving great light so that they can see the path that they've got to take across the Red Sea. And all the things that I've seen, this path across the Red Sea, it was about 3 to 5 miles across this Red Sea at this particular point. So they had quite a journey they had to make in that night. And so they are moving across the Red Sea at this point at night. And so they do it all night long. All night long, they're moving. All night long, you've got the pillar of cloud in front of the Pharaoh and his army, and they can't see what's going on. But they are ready. They are resting. They've come there quickly. They are ready to take the Israelites on when the time comes. Another amazing miracle, one we don't talk about very often, the one of darkness and light. Now, at some point, the cloud lifts. The Pharaoh's army saw that they had escaped across this dry patch in the middle of the Red Sea, and they are so full of anger, they are so full of whatever that they pursue them. So verse 23, the Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. So, this is in the last watch of the night, which is like between 3 and 6 in the morning. So, they finally lets them see through. They take off. They're going across the Red Sea. And then God throws them into confusion as they're crossing the Red Sea. And I love what happens next when they throw them into this confusion. He made the wheels of their chariots come off so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." They were done. I don't care how mad and how hot they were. Now they were scared. They realized that God was on their side because all their chariots stopped working and they couldn't get through, and they were stuck in what was a miraculous wonder to see now became an extremely fearful thing. Here they are stuck in the middle of the sea with a wall of water on the right and left. It was a trap. God had trapped them, and he did it to bring glory to his name and to judge Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And sure enough, that's what happens. Verse 26 through 28 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and the chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them back into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived." Full judgment. Now all of Egypt has been judged with all these 10 plagues, and now their great might and power of their army was also gone. Verse 29, "But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant." Finally, they feared the Lord and put their trust in him and Moses his servant. Finally, they trusted in the Lord. These Israelites just had a hard time with what they had known for the last 400 years, believing in this new God to them, but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he was their Lord and that he was fighting for them. And it took all this for them to finally release everything and say, we believe, we trust in you, God. I love what's next. What's next is after all this had happened, chapter 15. Chapter 15 is beautiful. Chapter 15 is Moses breaking out in song and worshiping God and giving God all the credit. Now, a lot of times we see people, political leaders, sports stars, actors, actresses, military leaders take credit for great things that happen, that they're a part of and have leadership over. The beautiful thing about this is the humility of Moses. And of course, now Moses, he's the one that they saw. He's the one who saw him raise, they saw him raise his staff. He was the figurehead. He was the one they all watched, and instead of dancing around and showing his muscles or doing the kind of thing that basketball players do or going, all the braggadocious things that people tend to do, he sang a song of worship to a God, giving all the credit to God out of gratitude and awe for how awesome he is. Look verse 11 of chapter 15. It says, "Who among the gods is like you, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders?" And then he goes and he describes all the wonders. It'd be like us breaking out into how great thou art. Just how great this God is that would do all this for them. And finally, your people, Lord, trust in you like I'm trusting in you. Oh, what a beautiful, amazing day. And then his sister breaks out in song and dance, and they just have a big old party praising God, worshiping him for the victory, his victory that he fought and won for them. That's beautiful. All right, so I would say that's part one of our study tonight, but quite frankly, that's a lot. And we've covered a lot there. There's so much in the crossing of the sea. And I want you to know that God will fight your battles for you if you will stand firm and trust in him. He's the kind of God that loves you and fights for you. The rest of our reading this last week was really on the journey that the Israelites are going to take now that God has given them this great victory. In chapter 16, they still don't head towards the land of Canaan. They still head south on the peninsula down there, and the Suez Peninsula. And so they're headed south towards Mount Sinai, and God has many things he's going to teach them there, and we're going to look at that next week. What God's going to teach them at Mount Sinai. But there are several things that happen on the way, and they're taking their time getting there. But again, it was a "what have you done for me lately" kind of faith. And so people start grumbling pretty quick. But granted, they are in a desert. And so they are in a desert, and then they need water, and they don't have water. God provides water. It's all right there in chapter 16. And then they're like, well, we don't have any bread to eat. And apparently they didn't want to slaughter all their cattle either. So God gives them manna to eat, and he gives them a quail. He gives them a feast one night of quail to come in, and they ate this quail that just landed in their midst, and they were able to take them and serve it up. It's a real delicacy, and so they were able to enjoy that. But even the manna that God gave them, he gave them that manna every day, as we see as we continue our study. For 40 years, every morning they had manna that was given them, this bread that came after the dew. When the dew evaporated, this bread that they had that they could collect. And I think one of the interesting things about that is he does it in a God way. I mean, it could have just been some kind of substance that they had and they just ate. It could have been like paste. It could have been anything like that. But no, when they ate this bread, it tasted like wafers with honey. Come on, I want some of that. I love wafers with honey. and so that was just another God thing, just showing his love for these people. and meeting their needs. And there's another song. We've talked a lot about music this week. There's another song by a very secular group called the Rolling Stones, and they wrote a song that has a chorus that actually has a spiritual application to it. And you're probably wondering, what on earth is he talking about? It's the song that says, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But you'll find sometimes, look around and you'll find, you get what you need. God supplies our needs. He gives us lots of things we want, but He makes sure we have what we need. That's a loving, wonderful God. So what have we learned today? Remember. Remember. All this, I want you to remember what the Lord has done for you. He asked the Israelites to remember. He asked them to commemorate it. And they do, even to this day. He wants you to remember what He has done for you. And when you remember it, do like Moses. Be like Moses. Worship Him in awe and in gratitude for all that He is and all He can do. And trust in Him. And you will see a victory. You will see a victory in your life. You will see a lot of victory in your life. I'm not saying that you don't have the mountain to climb. I'm just saying that there will be victories. And you will look back, you'll look around, and you'll find that through all of it, you've got what you need. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that Bible study tonight. Next week, we're continuing in our trip through Exodus. And there's a lot that's covered in our D group book for next week. It actually goes to chapter 18, 19, 20, and then it skips to 24 and then skips to chapter 31. So next week we're going to focus on Exodus chapter 20. Feel free to read chapters 17 through 31 of Exodus, but we're going to focus next week on Exodus chapter 20, which is the Ten Commandments. And we're going to read about what happened in that time. So I hope you will join me. I hope you enjoyed tonight's Bible study. God bless and good night.